While there is agreement that many of the most challenging issues related to sustainable agriculture can only be answered through a systems approach, no one has ever said that doing systems research is easy, because there is so much history behind component research. Approaches are well documented and research models are clear. SARE is supporting the development of training materials to help those of us focused on systems research to catch up. Hopefully, you have had a chance to study the materials for SARE by Dr. Lori Drinkwater. Those should give you a good start, but only one piece. We think the experiences of our exemplars is the next piece, and will give you the practical insights to get you started and to add to the likelihood of your success. While systems research does not have as much history and research culture to guide novices, those who have been successful at systems research have learned how to overcome challenges and deal with obstacles. They are very willing to share their experiences. Let's start with Vivian Allen. When asked about her dealing with a formidable obstacle, she told us about how she successfully dealt with the problem in a way which led to long-run success.
The most dramatic obstacle I faced was when my research was several years in progress, and I woke up one morning and discovered that the administrators had made the decision to change the research station into an entirely different objective, and so we woke up to the fact that that research that we were doing was going to be terminated. That was fairly dramatic and not something we could overcome on that particular research station, but the solution was to not give up, and it was to find a place we could move to, and we started a different approach and started over, and we were very successful ultimately in what we did. But it changed it. I mean, it stopped one and we started another, so that was a pretty dramatic impediment to continuing our research.
Dr. Allen also discusses how different views and attitudes of administrators, research partners, and clientele must be addressed. One such example is changing from a monocrop perspective to a systems perspective.
When we first started our research here and started looking at integrating a crop with livestock, we were dealing with two monocultures that hadn't traditionally worked together. We've had long-term cropping systems out here where people and their parents and maybe even grandparents were involved in that crop monoculture. We had people who had been in the cattle business and that's all they did. And those two industries knew very little of each other. And so when we started to put these together into a system, we had to deal with a lot of attitudes and concerns.
The answer to skeptics and those with differing views: use the Systems Research Project to discover useful information and communicate those results effectively.
There's a greater understanding and tolerance now that we're getting very, very useful information out of this systems research that's benefiting all parts of the agricultural industry out here.
Another way to deal with obstacles is to recognize that systems research often takes longer than component research, and that patience, as Charlie Jackson found, is important.
But if you understand your time constraints and you build in your work and you plan around that, you can achieve some very important and meaningful research in a short period of time too.
Another of Charlie's recommendations is to look at obstacles as opportunities.
How the disciplines are going to come together so that you're getting a more useful, more applicable answer to the question or the problem you're trying to solve.
Paul Mueller from North Carolina State University's The Center for Environmental Farming Systems discusses how perceptions based on past models can be an obstacle.
One of the problems that you have in some of the traditional component research is that it's small areas are allocated on experiment station, and it tends to be relatively small plots involved. And that kind of goes beyond the reality of what most farmers are facing. So one thing that we had as a prerequisite of this experiment that we started was that we would have scale. There would be size was important, because time and time again in a lot of the applied ag research that I've been involved in, when you bring farmers to field days and they look at the small plots that you're working with, it immediately is dismissed because they can't relate to it. So having this large systems experiment that really, when you go out there, it looks like a farm. It doesn't look like a set of small plots.
Another obstacle is getting support, and Paul discusses the technique of nesting, tucking smaller research projects into the larger systems model. The technique delivers results more quickly, gaining support for the efforts while contributing to the longer-run systems goals.
The most common way is what we call nesting, which is actually putting a smaller short-term study within the framework of the long-term study. And an example of this is when we started the study, of course we started in a conventional farm. In our organic system we had to transition. So we had 3 years there that we had to transition from a conventional operation to an organic one. So we decided to study that. And so we nested a smaller experiment within those large organic systems areas, looking at how one makes that transition. So that's a good example. One of those subplots we're managing under conventional tillage, and the other one is managed under conservation tillage. So no matter what happens in those two subplots, one's always conventional tillage, one's always in conservation tillage. So you have that comparison. So that's like a mini trial that's going on within the big trial.
Lack of funding is on almost everyone's list of obstacles. There are many sources of funding, and key to all of them is providing what the funders want. And from his programs at Appalachian Sustainable Development, Anthony Flaccavento's experience and advice is very consistent with Dr. Mueller's, even though his research is embedded in a community instead of a traditional research center.
So from a practical point of view, funders want to see results. If you can jump in and have that experience base developing while you're also figuring things out, I think it makes you more fundable.
And a final piece of advice from Anthony gives us practical suggestions on working with funding agencies.
There's a whole infrastructure component, and there's a certain world of funders who want to fund that stuff. There's a whole education component for farmers. There's an education component for consumers. Then there's these pieces of the support businesses that you need to build this all up and make it more of an economic initiative. There's certain people who put their money into that. So you end up parceling out little bits from multiple people in order to fund the whole system.